Welcome to an Inconvenient sequel, part of our Global Watch documentary series that we do all year long. And I want to first of all thank the sponsors of that series. It's the Theodore and Renee Weiler Foundation and the Louis and Ann Abrons Foundation. I want to thank them so much because they make these events happen all year long. Thank you. I'm gonna be quick because we have a really full program here, but I would say only this basically is that you can either sit home and drive yourself absolutely nuts, or you can come here and do something constructive. And have a chance to find out the institutions that are really working and working hard that we can get involved in. And working at climate change, which is the issue that if you're paying attention to all of the craziness that comes out of the White House will never come out of that. So keeping our eyes on the ball, it's great that all of you guys are here. When this sold out in like a week, it was so heartening, believe me. So here's who's gonna come on stage after the film. It's Karenna Gore, the director of the Center for Earth, yes. The director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. Paul Gallay, president of Riverkeeper, yes. Michael Shank, head of communications for the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network in New York City. Manna Greene, environmental action director for Hudson River Sloop Clearwater since 2000. Yes. And Nancy Vann is going to be the moderator, president and founder of safe energy rights group SNeRG, an organization dedicated to protecting communities in the Northeast from unsafe energy development and infrastructure. Don't we need that? So let's watch the film and then we will talk. Thank you.
And it is right to save the future for humanity. It is wrong to pollute.
If you could feel me, where I feel.
I just also wanted to say there's an accompanying book with that film called Truth to Power that you can take and you can give to people who are not here. And the Village Bookstore, our wonderful Village Bookstore, is going to have it on sale afterwards outside.
Down here.
Now let's welcome our fantastic guests.
Hi, guys. It's so great to see so many of you here today, to see how many people can fill this auditorium who really care about climate change and about our environment to come out on a weeknight. I know a lot of you have to be at work in the morning, and this goes a little long, but this really is about saving our world. I had some somewhat prepared remarks, but I wanted to mention one other thing. When I was fighting against the pipeline that's going next to Indian Point, and we're still fighting it, and we'll be in court with it in October, people used to say, well, you don't get enough sleep. Why are you staying up so late? Why do I get emails from you at 4 in the morning? And I would tell them, well, if you knew that the 9 million people that live in New York, 21 million people in the New York City area depended on a pipeline not rupturing next to Indian Point power plant, and you were trying to stop that from happening, and you thought, well, maybe one more email, maybe one more text, maybe one more tweet would make a difference to one more person, what would you do? And these people who are on this wonderful panel have been doing that type of thing for many, many years. Right now we're at the critical juncture of 3 different things that are happening in our world. First of all, the relentless march of climate change, which you've seen so much about in this particular movie, which is just wonderful. I hadn't seen it before, and I'm just blown away. The next thing is that our federal government, as mentioned, is pulling back all of the protections for our climate. We're now not part of the Paris Accord. Our EPA is being devastated, but the destruction keeps going on. The third thing is the good news, is that there's going to be, coming up in November, there are going to be some elections. Not the federal election that everybody went out to in New York, at least, and tried to stop what's happening now from happening. But there'll be state and local and county elections. And I'm hoping that some of these folks on the panel will be able to give us some pointers on what we can do on a local, state, county level to stop what is happening now, to make a difference. And I'd like to give you a little bit of information about each of them. I'm going in alphabetical order by last name. There's Paul Gallay, who's the president of Riverkeeper. He was instrumental in some of the activities that were required for Indian Point nuclear plant to be closing down now, so that I'm not going to be quite as worried maybe about all of Manhattan being under a nuclear cloud and uninhabitable for 24,000 years. Karenna Gore, who's the director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary, which is connected to Columbia University, one of my old alma maters. And then Manna Greene. She was one of the first people who helped us when we started fighting against the Algonquin pipeline, and has been an inspiration not just to me, but for people for as long, well, I can't even imagine how many people over the years have been sailing on the Sloop Clearwater and going to the wonderful presentations that have been done by that group and learning about how interacted we are with and how much part of our natural environment we are. And then to take it up to another level from our local level, we have Michael Shank, who works with the UN. And we're not just the only frontline community now. I thought of us here in Peekskill and in Westchester, Peekskill, my hometown, and in Westchester, as being on the front lines of the Algonquin pipeline with all of the greenhouse gases it's putting into the air. Then I thought about, well, if Indian Point goes up, that's all of Manhattan. So, that's New York City's a frontline community. And then, of course, if our financial system is destroyed, our nation's finance system, everybody in our country will be a frontline community. But then what's going to happen to our world? And beyond what would happen to our world from our own personal local actions, what's going to happen to our world if we can't reverse the course that's being set by our federal government and really step up for climate change? And Michael is helping us to think about that on a worldwide basis. So I'd like to ask Karenna to say a few words, and after they've had a chance to talk, we're going to take questions from the audience. So thank you for being here, and Karenna Gore.
Thank you, Nancy. I will be very brief. I know it's already late, and we don't have very much time, and I'm honored to be on this stage with people who are doing such substantive and vital work. So I want us to be able to hear from them. And really, I want to say just a few things. First, that there's so much leadership in the climate movement in places that aren't always acknowledged. I'm very proud of my father's work, and I'm very proud of the film. And I just know that many people are working in so many areas in frontline communities, working against fossil fuel infrastructure, to protect the precious rivers and air, and just to acknowledge that, because a lot of people are starting to think about climate change, but a lot of people, and especially here, have already been working on it for a very long time from their own perspective and where they're coming from. And then I just want to say also, well, thank you, Nancy. I was so happy that you invited me to join tonight, and to have a chance to just be with you and support you is really wonderful. And we met because of activism against fossil fuel infrastructure in this area. And I want to acknowledge you in particular as being such a wonderful source of information about that. A lot of times it's overwhelming to know all of the regulatory processes, not to mention all of the details about methane emissions, and to really get all that right. And you're just a wonderful resource for people who are interested in learning and patient. And I think that just the last thing I want to say is that I think the whole notion of truth is really important right now, and particularly where our democratic process is involved. And I know many of us are feeling so frustrated and shocked and hurt about the state of dialogue from the highest levels in our politics right now. And it really is, there's a quote from Aldous Huxley about truth, and that truth is powerful, but silence about truth is powerful too. And by simply not mentioning certain topics, totalitarian governments can keep their grip on power stronger than denunciations would even do. Simply silence. And I think that's what we've had about climate change, a very, very deliberate averting of our attention from it. And it is so because of our nature as human beings and the long-term, short-term, and all of this. It is a serious existential challenge that I believe we're at the cusp of growing into, and it is so related to the ways in which we're being distracted from the real topic about what's happened in Charlottesville, for example. That we could see those images and see what was really happening out there with the torches and the chanting, and then that's not the topic is just stunning. And I think that it is just important that we connect these issues in the sense not only of abuse of power and depression and some of the root causes, but also in our response and how we're going to very deliberately, and in a space like this is a very deliberate communal space where we come together as citizens and people to think together and be together. And I'm really happy to be a part of that, and I just want to acknowledge that that very process itself is the most important form of resistance. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Karenna. I remember when Al Gore was elected president, and I was so excited about that, and then his election was stolen too. But I do still think of him as President Al Gore because he was elected our president. And Paul Gallay, whose Riverkeeper is part of our lawsuit against the AIM pipeline, which we're going to be going down to Washington, D.C., and who, of course, has been fighting for the health of our river, for the PCBs to be cleaned up, for all of the things that keep us healthy, and now for the climate change.
Well, thank you, Nancy, Karenna, Manna, and Michael, but mostly thank you all for giving your time this evening, for the support that you have provided to help Riverkeeper in the last 7 years be part of an agreement to close the Indian Point nuclear power plant, be part of a commitment by Governor Cuomo to ban fracking in New York State, to be part of a commitment that would bring $2.5 billion into investment in our water infrastructure so that we will be able to have a future where our families can swim, fish, boat, and drink water safely, which is a gift that we must give. And to be involved, 10,000 people put comments in to Trump's administration on the issue of the crude oil tankers and barges. And I kid you not, the spokeswoman for the Coast Guard said on June 29th, 10,000 comments have proved to us that we don't understand the Hudson River and the potential impacts of this project, these anchorages, these long-term storage areas for crude oil tankers and barges. We don't understand the potential adverse impacts of this proposal well enough to move forward, and we are suspending the proposal, and we're going to enter into a broader discussion of what the Hudson needs to be healthy and what our community needs to have a healthy maritime industry in America in June 2017. So the message of my introductory remarks are, we can win. We are winning. The emissions in the United States peaked in 2005 and are down 14% since then because of energy efficiency, because of wind power, because of conservation, and because of technical innovation. And we have made a start. And perhaps as the evening progresses, we'll have some more ideas as to how to take that start really to the level we will need to win on climate. Thank you.
I want to add one thing that Paul usually mentions, and he didn't get around to it today, but from 2012, Riverkeeper has been giving people the report saying we don't need any fossil fuel infrastructure expansion to make up for the energy loss when Indian Point goes offline.
I was going to save some of my good stuff for later, but thank you.
Oh, okay. But he's one of that's something that we all need to know when, as Karenna mentioned, we get these alt truths. People say, well, what are we going to do for the energy? We do have people who know what we're going to do, and it is important that we listen to them. So I'd like to, I'm going to save Manna Joe for last, because this is about the environment, Trump, and the elections. And Manna Joe has a special position as a longtime environment and also an elected official. So I'm going to let Michael Shank ask him to speak about it.
Finish the phrase for me. If you see something, great. If Manna Joe were to leave her bag on a subway alone, what would you do with the bag? You would shoot it? You would shoot it? Okay. That could be dangerous. What else would you do with the bag? Report it? Yeah. You'd be suspicious of it? There is an awareness on terrorism that we are not seeing on climate. And I'm going to give you some quick polling. So Yale and George Mason do polling on climate attitudes and climate behaviors all the time. I put it in my dissertation. I love what they do. They sat on my committee. If you haven't checked out their work, check it out. Just Google Yale, George Mason, climate attitudes. Majority of America believes climate change is happening. Majority of America wants to cap CO2 emissions as a pollutant. Majority of America wants to ramp up renewable energy. Great. Minority of America is contacting their elected officials. Minority of America is contacting their media. Minority of America is doing anything different in terms of how they consume. That's a problem. So on terrorism, hyper alert, hyper aware, we'd shoot Manna's bag. Everyone knows how to finish the phrase. So how do we create that awareness and readiness and daily practice? You all living near New York City, some of you work in New York City, I work in New York City. I am hyper aware of any action that could be perceived as a terrorist threat. Absolutely, no question. How do we transition that awareness to a threat that is killing more people every year? 6.5 million people globally die every year from air pollution. This was not a report by Greenpeace. This was not a report by Friends of the Earth. International Energy Agency, the IEA, produced that. New York Times did a story, find it. So we're dying in mass from a threat that trumps terrorism threat. Tens of thousands, 26,000 according to the State Department in 2016 died from terrorism, acts of terrorism. 6.5 million dead every year from climate change. So, in the vein of hashtag be inconvenient, my quick pitch to you is this. Quoting Martin Luther King, because I'm teaching a grad class right now at NYU on power and politics, and our assignment last night was Cornel West's The Radical King, which is all of MLK's great works. And one of those was MLK making the case to boycott the Coca-Colas back then, the Wonder Breads back then, because they weren't fairly treating their employees. I bring that up because Al Gore ended with MLK and with the following. So how often do we vote?
Every election.
And majority of America tends to vote during the presidential, less so during congressional, and even less so state, local. How often do you eat? How often do you put on clothes? How often do you waste, create waste? Okay. So what I want is hyper-awareness on those three fronts. Food, carbon emissions, any guesses? Pound of meat versus a pound of veggies? 150 times the GHGs. Fashion, second most polluting industry out there. 10% of all GHGs from apparel industries. Waste, forget about it. If you're not tracking where we are with waste, we are in a sad situation. And talking with Peekskill Common Council about, and some of you are here tonight from the Common Council about what do we do with waste. If I want to shut down the waste to energy plant that's polluting hundreds of millions of toxins into my air, creating an F from the American Lung Association for Westchester County, I have to prevent the waste going into that waste to energy plant. So that's the conversation I want to have, because I don't have the ability to call up the Indian minister. I was at the Paris climate process because of my work, but a lot of us don't have the capacity that Al Gore is using very effectively, and props to him for using his power and privilege to affect change. So how do we be the Al Gores? How do we be the Cristiano Figueres every single day on food, fashion, and waste, things we can control right now? So that's what I'm interested in talking about.
And as I mentioned, Manna Jo is both a wonderful environmentalist and an elected official, and I hope that she'll be able to give us some information about how she combines those two and what we need to do.
Thank you, Nancy. Is this on? Yeah. First of all, I want to say that I did leave my wallet in a cab at the train station in Washington, D.C., and a cab driver named Gotti went directly with it to FedEx, and I had it by 8:40 in the morning the next day. So there are wonderful people in the world, and in that spirit, I'd like to say that as an elected official, I've been running for office for 30 years, and I've been serving for 11 and a half. And years ago, I was considered the crunchy granola tree-hugging outlier. And since Superstorm Sandy and Lee and some of the other immediate effects here in the Hudson Valley, I'm now looked at as a resource person, and I chair the Climate Smart Committee in Ulster County. What I'd like to do is focus on what we can do and ask that each of you, for the last 100 years, our electricity system has been dominated by fossil fuel. And for the last 50 years, that was supplemented with nuclear power. Both those industries are, well, at least the coal industry and the nuclear industry are collapsing, and those of us that have been working to close Indian Point and those of us that have been working to prevent more fossil fuel infrastructure are now working together to promote a renewable energy economy, which is coming on board very, very rapidly. But what you can do is learn how the grid works, learn the history of the energy industry. With that background information, you're going to be much more effective as activists and organizers for climate mitigation. The other thing is, this film is a wonderful tool, as well as the book. Share it with your elected officials, but not just your elected officials, with the people at the DPW that are responsible every single day for roads and buildings, and your transit people, and your educators, and your emergency management people, and the people you wouldn't normally think to talk to. Reach out to them, give them a copy of the film, give them a copy of the book, have that conversation. So that's, I think, a very good starting point. And I want to recommend one resource in particular. It's a book called The Grid, and I apologize for, I was going to bring it, but I am not thinking of the author right now. But it is available both as a book and an audio tape, and it's an excellent history for you to build that base of knowledge that you need to have to move forward so we can collectively and collaboratively create the future that needs to be created. And it'll take every single one of us and all of the people you can reach out to. Thank you.
It's really great that Manna Jo has gone from being one of those crunchy people to one of those substantive people that everyone looks to for that kind of knowledge. I'd just like to also thank all the people, take a little minute to thank all of the elected officials who've come here tonight to learn more about climate and climate state. Would everyone who's an elected official or former elected official please stand up? And anybody who works for a government agency, I'd like to recognize you too. So, and talking about people that deserves extra recognition, one of the people that was in Al Gore's training sessions actually organized that. That is Tina Bongar. Don't see where she's sitting, but she's a wonderful, wonderful woman. And shows just how effective these things can be. I'd like you guys to get a chance to talk to each other. Certainly you must have had a question, and I'm sorry if I stepped on your punchline, Paul. But with all these great resources, do you have any questions for each other before we take any questions from the audience?
Well, I'll ask my fellow panelists if they have any impressions of the new climate laws in California and Illinois and the work that's being done here in New York with the reforming the energy vision. Because I think that we're looking for the ways that work, as one of my fellow organizations, Environmental Defense Fund, puts it. And do you feel that they've worked? What's worked about them? What do we need to change when the next state makes its next law on climate abatement?
I'll do a quick answer. So the three frames that I use when I message on climate, I generally stay away from environmental frames. I generally stay away from moral frames unless I'm speaking to an audience in a church or a temple, of course. And I generally stay away from humanitarian unless I'm speaking about Syria. I tend to only use the following three: economics, health, and security. And fortunately or unfortunately, we have enough data to back up all those frames in our use. And I tack towards those primarily because that's what people care about. They care about the money, they care about their health, and they care about their security. So when I think about the opportunities in New York State, the economics are there in terms of weatherizing your home or an efficiency program through NYSERDA or any of that kind of thing. When I think about plastic in the ocean, and by 2050 we're gonna have more plastic in the ocean than fish, that's an economic, health, and security all in one. You don't even have to do a do-gooder, hey, let's clean up the litter. No, this is threatening our food supply. It's going to impact your health, it's going to impact serious economies around the world, and it's creating incredible instability in our marine ecosystem. So you have those at your disposal. I encourage you to use them. I use them all the time, and it's not hard to find the data to back up an economic, health, or security frame to talk about what is ultimately a moral, environmental, and humanitarian issue. It's just my thought.
I'm going to take Paul's question head on and say that in New York State, we do have a reforming the energy vision process that has 3 tiers. Tier 1 and Tier 2 are to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency. But for renewables, there's a requirement for load-serving entities like Con Ed or Central Hudson or Orange and Rockland and your ESCOs to purchase a certain amount of renewable energy every year. There is not a requirement for energy efficiency. And Riverkeeper has been really championing, it's a hard word to say, the need for very specific requirements to achieve the state's goals for energy efficiency, as well as the renewable energy goal of 50% by 2030. I think we are on track for that, and I hope we exceed that. There's also Tier 3, however, and Tier 3 of the Clean Energy Standard that came out of REV, the Reforming the Energy Vision process, is a $7.6 billion nuclear subsidy that Clearwater is challenging in the courts right now. And I brought with me Amory Lovin's article. If you don't know who Amory Lovins is, he's one of the founders of the Rocky Mountain Institute. And in the world of achieving a renewable energy economy, he's close to God. And Amory has published several papers and documents that are available criticizing the $7.6 billion mandatory 12-year nuclear subsidy, not just in New York, but also one in Illinois. And because it's a misuse, he believes it's a very poor economic investment of ratepayer dollars, that these dollars should be going to promoting renewable energy and energy efficiency very, very rapidly because of the crisis we're in, and that it'll create many more jobs and be a much more sound investment. And then with regard to California and Hawaii, those are states that are rapidly expanding their renewable energy portfolio. And I hear the criticism that renewables are variable often, but they're talking about putting in huge, massive solar systems with the battery storage right there. So every single day those batteries get charged by the solar system, and that provides the energy at night when the sun is down. And that can also happen with wind. Here in New York, we have wind, solar, and renewables scaling up at such a rapid rate, and we do have offshore wind also coming on board. But we haven't really adequately addressed storage, and can and should. And must.
Although Michael doesn't want to talk about social good and moral aspects and health of what we're facing right now, unless we're in church or some other comparable situation. I think the fact that you've all come out here tonight does indicate that you care about those things. And that is, of course, Karenna's area of expertise from Union Theological Seminary, where our current president is distracting us with alt facts. He's pursuing what has been described in literature as the Russian propaganda method of trying to take over the public domain, the public consensus. And that's working far too well, as we saw in Charlottesville. Karenna, do you have any ideas on what we could do about that?
I think that what we're up against with this particular president is it's a kind of distillation of the problem that sometimes I feel like it's just beckoning us to rise to the occasion, to respond, and there's a kind of change at work, a dynamism in terms of, I think many of us just feel so pent up with wanting to respond better that eventually we're all going to get there. I know that's not a very good response. I guess I'm torn between answering two different points of your question. One about the moral and ethical and spiritual sort of dimensions of this conversation, and the other specifically about Donald Trump. I know they're related. But anyway, I would just say he is a distillation of this problem, pressing all of these buttons of what you can see as there's a foundation for how we got here with climate change. And that is this sense that we're disconnected from the rest of the natural world, that human beings are separate and superior. I work at a seminary, and we do feel theological roots to a lot of these things. And of course, you can look at that from the Judeo-Christian tradition in the kind of interpretation of dominion, from the Bible, a kind of a concern more with the afterlife from the standpoint of Christianity. There are certain ways, and this world that we live in, this society that we live in, is not neutral to religion. It's been very much shaped by a certain worldview based on people who over the past generations who have shaped it. So I think that it's important that we look at some of those really root causes. And the work of some of these organizations, particularly just in how we relate to the river, that this is not, our culture, there were cultures not that long ago where going down down to the river, acknowledging the river, drinking from the river, washing our clothes there, enjoying, would be part of everyday life, or part of consciousness, family memories, community rituals. And now that is not how we live, even if you're right near it. And I think that's really related to why people can't imagine that we could affect the global atmosphere. I mean, there are a lot of people that just don't think it's possible. And it's obviously a religious view on some level, a faith-based, or it's certainly not a rational view. So I think it's important that we acknowledge, but in a non-judgmental way, acknowledge these things, and then you can really see how the current leadership plays on that very deliberately. And also, of course, the culture war, that, you know, if you care about this, you're somehow less tough on these other things, and you belong to a different sort of tribe. So Nancy, I don't think I really answered your question, but I do feel like sometimes when we talk about religion, it can be a larger category, and people can bring more things to that kind of conversation than just the kind of conventional religion.
I think that's a very, very good answer to the question, because I think it gets at the root of the nihilism and the anarchy that is the Donald Trump administration. It's meaninglessness raised to a level of, it would be absurd if it wasn't so damaging. And when I think of how we could ethically combat that, I think it is a question of inspiration. When I think of 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when my wife, my daughter, and I were in this theater watching the first movie, and when one of the fellows there said, you know, it's game over. It's already game over. It was like, Bill McKibben times a million. And my daughter, who was 11 at the time, got up and said, I'm 11 years old. I don't want to hear you say it's game over. I don't know whether you're right or not, but I'm not going to stop trying, because I can't imagine being 11 and not having some possibility of a meaningful future. So the opposite of nihilism, inspiration. When we were fighting Indian Point, when we were fighting fracking, when we were fighting the anchorages, we at Riverkeeper, we'd go to bed knowing that there were things we could do tomorrow that were exciting and that would be productive and that would move the ball. And we have got to give the rest of America that sort of excitement, along with the reality that we see in that film. There's 200 people somewhere in Westchester today who have better jobs because of energy efficiency efforts in their community or solar installation. There's 2,000 people somewhere in Brooklyn. There's 400 people somewhere in Kingston. Those are the stories we've got to tell, and we've got to inspire, and we've got to get people to go to sleep thinking of the things they can do tomorrow to make their situations better, to fight nihilism, and to actually profit from doing so.
Can I pivot off that? So could we consider ourselves walking billboards, in that if we're truly walking the talk, that what I said previously about our food and fashion choices, that we are then advocates every moment of every day? I'll give you a quick note about my work at the UN. So we produce every year a global index that ranks countries by how sustainable they are. Right around the same time that the UN convened the Paris Climate Agreement, they also convened and ratified and voted on the Sustainable Development Goals, which will articulate the UN's work for the next 15 years. And that's how my organization was established, the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We're creating the surround sound for those SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So we rank countries by how well they're performing. US, any guesses? Was 42nd for a lot of reasons. Our emissions, our inequality, because sustainable development covers social, economic, and environmental. But this year we looked at externalities, how we outsource our social and environmental costs overseas in the production of this or in the production of any of the products that we consume throughout the day, that we've externalized our footprint. And it's the Cambodias and the Vietnams and the Bangladeshs and the Chinas that are propping up the lifestyle that we are living. And our carbon footprint is 17 tons per person per year. China's closer to 5 tons per person per year, and India's closer to 2 tons per person per year. So we have an incredible footprint. So the opportunity to pivot off these comments about inspiration, for me, while the facts are overwhelming, my inspiration comes from the opportunity that we have, incredible growth opportunity here in terms of being personal messengers and truly walking the talk. I think there's so much opportunity for us to grow. And as an example, these are fair trade organic jeans. This shirt is not, however. This is an older shirt that I ultimately need to wear to its ruin. These are leather. I'm not happy with these shoes. These are Rockport, but they're leather. I don't feel good about that as a vegetarian/vegan. So I'm halfway there. And the undershirt, I'm now sharing too much. And my boxers are fair trade organic. But this is not, and this is not. So how do we move forward, and how do we become personal ambassadors in all that was discussed tonight?
I'm glad we don't have to ask you the boxer a brief question then. And Karenna, I think that your answer was
I just want to say one
great.
more quick thing, which is that basically the worldview that's being presented to us is not a new one. It's that some people don't count. You know, in the circle of human dignity, some people don't count. And we know that we've lived from the beginning of this country with that tension, polarity built into it. And now with climate change, I think it's a really good point to raise that in Bangladesh and these other, what the expense of human life and suffering that's being paid on the other side of the world from people whose lives are often, supporting, working in factories, supporting, making the goods that we're just carelessly consuming over here. It's a worldview where those people don't count, but also future generations. So just to put that ethical framework out there as well, that they don't count. We can't even conceive of them in a moral universe with which we would make our decisions today. So I think what we're really countering is that way of thinking, and just to counter that by seeing the human dignity as equal and not this ranked way of thinking.
Karenna keeps inspiring me, and I again have to play off what she has said, because here in the United States, one of the first things that happened after Trump said he was pulling out of the climate accord was that there was a movement called We Are Still In. The We Are Still In movement has 240 cities and counties. It has 2,500 corporations. There's a U.S. climate initiative with 13 states. It was formed by New York, California, Washington. 10 other states have grown. If those 13 states were a nation, it would be the third largest economy in the world. And one of the things I love about the Illinois law is that there's $775 million for communities of color and other communities that are coming forward and trying to improve their position to invest in renewables, invest in energy efficiency, and increase the equity and inclusion of our movement, which is, of course, sorely needed. So one of the best things we can do is realize that we have as much power as we're willing to grab for, and that the politicians will be responsive. In Illinois and California, both those laws were, to some degree, rough compromises, but they were bipartisan. And that, I think, is an essentiality.
Thanks, Paul.
We'd like to take a few questions from the audience.
Yes.
I would like to thank you all and ask, could you please speak to how the people in this room could individually divest from fossil fuels, but also encourage academic institutions, religious institutions, and municipalities from divesting from fossil fuels? Thank you.
I'll just say Union Theological Seminary did divest from fossil fuels, the first seminary in the nation, so that was a wonderful thing that I want to mention. And many religious denominations have voted to do that, are currently debating it, and it is that time when it is also in a very clear economic interest to do so. I mean, that's the thing. I think when we're in this conversation in a seminary, we sort of like to sometimes say, well, what if it wasn't? You know, would you still do it? But now it's kind of striking to see how people will cling to something, even when you can see the markets going in the other direction. And there's some other strange force at work that I don't quite understand. But I would say in order to divest, convene the conversation and look at the economics, probably first, at least as much as you look at the moral argument, because it's pretty striking and I think will be surprising.
I would also encourage people, if you haven't already, either put solar on your house, on your community center. Find a way to be sure that you're responsible for, we call it the 5 kilowatt solar pledge, but each one of you can either do that directly, join a community solar program, or as a less direct option, you can purchase 100% renewable energy. So take that responsibility to be part of this very rapid escalation of the renewable energy economy. Do your share.
Okay, do we have another question back there?
This is not a question, but I just wanted everybody who gets their electricity from Con Edison, you can select an ESCO, an energy supply company, that will give you electricity only from wind or solar. You don't just have to go to somebody who's giving you fossil fuel or nuclear energy. So you all have it in your ability to join this movement. And I also do want to just reiterate, democracy is not a spectator sport. And so if you have ideas, write to, call, email your elected officials and tell them what they should be doing to make our world better.
If I could just follow up on what Gary said, because you introduced the idea of closing Indian Point, and this is the challenge for the downstate area. Indian Point is going to close. SNeRG has already told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, we don't want a 20-year license. We just want a license that takes us to the end of the closure agreement. It's not in their economic interest anymore. The risk is heinous. The opportunity is enormous. This plant is going to close in 2021. And the question is, are we going to close it green, or are we just going to close it? And I would like to say that Riverkeeper considers it to be a moral and ethical obligation that we close it without additional fossil fuels, and we can do it twice over. We have issued a study with the Natural Resources Defense Council, which we paid a lot of money for. We hired a very reputable firm, very mainstream firm, and they said, you have at least 2 different ways to close Indian Point in its entirety without more fossil fuels. So to follow up with Gary, who is a warrior on the Indian Point issue, vote with your feet, vote with your bill, vote with your roof, and make sure that we close Indian Point the right way.
Thanks very much, Paul.
May I just add one thing? I just want to say, since we're mentioning the closing of Indian Point, Unit 2 and Unit 3 in 2020 and 2021, that's a very short window of time. And we're deeply committed to being sure that the plant is safely decommissioned and that the workers are either retained or retrained and placed in jobs that are equivalent to what they are how they are able to earn a living now. So safe decommissioning and a just transition for the workers. And it's extremely important that those workers with institutional memory and technical knowledge are retained through decommissioning, because if they bring in others that have to consult a manual to figure out something if there's a problem rather than have the life experience, we're not going to be as safe. Thank you.
Just to follow up on what Manna Jo said, the governor does have a task force, and in November you're going to have a chance to vote for people that you in the county and some of the people at the state level that will influence how the plant is closed. And I hope that you'll pay attention to who's saying what and who cares about this really important issue for our area in particular. Questions back there?
Question right here.
There have been a lot of really profound observations coming from this discussion. I wanted just to flag one that was quietly mentioned by Karenna Gore early, which was this observation that she made: the truth is under siege in our culture. And I think that this probably, as much as any factor that we've touched on, pervades all of our spheres, institutional spheres, our public spheres, our private lives. It's the underpinning of our society and our system. It's something that we should double our commitment to fighting for, objecting to the denigration of truth. And that's my small advertisement. But the question I have is, if anybody on the panel thinks that Trump, with his contempt for truth, disregard for the international consensus, and his determination to dismantle all of the progress that we've made over the last several generations, may in fact be a catalyst for a renewed commitment to environmental values that you all have been working so hard to advance.
Yes.
Well,
certainly we've seen more activists come out. Our roles have swelled. People are getting involved in local elections, local politics, and that is very heartening to see. Lies are what has been trickling down, but just like trickle-down economics, we think that that's going to fail. We think that the hate that we see in Charlottesville and that type of thing trickling down from the top of this administration is going to fail because of the groundswell of grassroots efforts coming from us to say, no, we're not going to take this. Like Paul mentioned about all of the different groups. Eric Schneiderman, the New York State Attorney General, is part of a group of attorneys general around the country that are trying to sue the government and Exxon about the lies that they've told. So I think that the answer to that is yes, we will have a groundswell and we will be successful as we have been before.
Just really quick, I just want to say I think it's amazing to look at the media landscape and how much it's changed, and that this is a reality television president. Came out of that and came out of the mixing of news and entertainment, and it's just been so chaotic to see that landscape try to respond. And I do think it's being reorganized and that there's some hope, but a lot of it seems to me about the means of communication and how we can start to reclaim a civic space in which there is an ability to reason and to come and make decisions based on an agreed set of facts. So I just want to raise that point about the means of communication and television and how significant that is.
Truth is tough because we're not rational beings. If we were, we would stop subsidizing fossil fuels. The global subsidization of fossil fuels is $5.3 trillion. That was an IMF study. So every year we're all paying collectively $5.3 trillion to subsidize fossil fuels and their impact. The cleanup, we're paying for the cleanup. If we were rational beings, we'd stop that process. So that's tough. I want to give an answer, though, to your question, are we seeing a renewal? Yes. So under the previous administration, there was complacency. I used to work in Congress, and I've co-authored with a lot of members of Congress, and under the previous administration, I proposed to several very left members of Congress who I thought would say yes, the following. Let's write a piece together, I've already written it for you, where all you, generally how it works. I do the work. But that says the following. We're going to divest from fossil fuel campaign contributions. Theoretically, a simple ask for these far left members whom I won't mention. No, no, no. One couldn't because they had a blind trust. One couldn't because they ran it up the Democratic ladder. I don't know why they did that. And then the leadership said no because we'd upset other members in the caucus from West Virginia, etc. So they said no. I am seeing a renewed, well, it's not even renewed, it's unparalleled and unprecedented in terms of action and activism among members now that I didn't see under the previous administration because they thought that this stuff was being taken care of by the administration. And so, yes, incredible activism among members of Congress and activism among the press that I've never seen before either. So it's waking up the Jake Tappers in pretty amazing ways. Now we have to take it further and do more and create the space that Karenna is talking about because we don't have that space. Media is not that space currently. But I am seeing an activism that is inspiring.
Okay, if you guys had to rank the biggest barriers to why some environmental laws or practices can't get passed, like in terms of things like plutocracy, or through minimizing, or even just plain downplaying, like how would that probably rank to what prevents getting the message across?
Fear is the enemy. People are so afraid of so many things. Some things they should be afraid of. Other things they've been duped into being afraid of. The thing they're afraid of when it comes to climate is the idea that it will somehow, if we fight it, it will cost too much. If we fight it, others won't fight it, and so it won't make a difference what we do. If we fight it, we'll take energy away from the things that are more important. And as Michael observed in his very first comments, this fear is causing people to misplace their priorities into areas that aren't nearly as big a matter to work on. So we have to fight fear with something that will give people the courage to see more clearly and take better steps. And it's hard to get courage when you're afraid, but it's doable, and it's usually doable by showing that you can make a difference. And we are making some difference here, but if we're going to win this, we have to take it to scale, and a lot more people have to get the idea that they can make a difference and they don't have to be so afraid.
It's a great question. I'm just going to second his with convenience. I haven't owned a car in 20 years, and the worst city to live in without a car is LA. And if I lived there for 2 years, and if I needed to get anywhere, I had to account for maybe 2.5 hours just to get somewhere by bus. And convenience is a huge obstacle for a lot of people when they think through food choices, fashion choices, waste choices, plastic bottles, things like that. Convenience is a huge obstacle. So props to the hashtag here in terms of hashtag being convenient, because I think that captures some of the obstacles that you phrased.
We have time for one last audience question. There's right here. Oh, there's one right here. Yeah.
Hi, so my question was inspired by a scene in the movie where I think it was the Secretary of Energy in India was talking about the cost of going green. So coming from a social justice perspective, how do you respond to critiques that it's a privilege to be able to go green, that to have the means, the money, the ability to go green? Especially just thinking in terms of I'm a college student, how do you inspire universities to get on track with that kind of movement? Thank you so much for being here.
Well, I think I would say that in the movie, in that particular exchange, I thought it was very interesting. I think it's important that point be heard. That we have used up this airspace for 150 years, and it's important to acknowledge that. I think that the rebuttal is that, of course, it's made everybody sick, this exact form of energy, and a lot of the costs just aren't counted. So when you talk about the cost of going green, a lot of times we're only counting certain things in that. So we're not counting the asthma, even the cognitive effects that one can have from living in polluted areas. That it just hasn't been considered. So it's, I think, important to actually look at the real cost and not just the price tags on certain things right now, because those are also set by virtue of where the subsidies are and that sort of thing. I think that also it's important to look at that issue in terms of community choices and not just individual choices. That, we don't, a lot of times we structure things as if we're all just individuals and making these consumer choices, and we can judge each other and point fingers and say you're a hypocrite or not or whatever. And really we're making choices in families and communities, and if we come together and decide that we want to prioritize things that are going to make it a healthier place in the long term, saving money and all the other things that are even more important than money in life, then that we can make that possible.
So I would like to say that for many years the phrase was increased diversity, and now people understand that diversity is part of really a three-part analysis. Are you diverse? Are you fair, or equity as the phrase goes, and are you inclusive? So diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think the core of the second and the third is, are you sharing power? Are you sharing decision making? Are you listening before you talk? And are you making decisions together that people have a stake in? And I think that, to me, the best part of an excellent film was the stuff about Solar City and the intellectual property license, which helped obviously get us the Paris Climate Agreement, which Trump cannot leave until after the end of his term, the end of his one term, if he gets that long.
I just want to add one more thing to that, because I find a lot of people will say, well, I can't afford Whole Foods, whole paycheck, or I can't afford fair trade organic, it's too expensive, that kind of thing. And often those same people, because they're friends of mine, will have no problem buying 3 or 4 drinks at the bar, but then aren't willing to take that money and move it into changing markets. I don't expect someone who's living on a minimum wage in America, because it's so awful, to be able to buy a Prius or buy fair trade organic. That's not the expectation. I do expect, however, people with power and privilege to be able to shift the markets so that it is eventually affordable for everyone. And that's how the markets work. The electric cars are becoming cheaper because people who did have power and privilege were able to buy them and slowly shift the markets so that someone like me eventually, hopefully, will be able to buy an electric truck or a hybrid truck or something like that, which currently is in the market, but we'll get there. So, when I go into a mini mart and there's like one organic item there, even if I don't need it, I will buy it to send a message to the owner that we want organic in this store. And then I have like a random, whatever. But the point is, like, those of us with means, we can make decisions to move markets so that those with fewer means will eventually be able to make the same decision, because they want to too. So.
To just reiterate, because of the title of our panel, which was Environmental Activism in Elections in the Age of Trump, we don't have to do it all as individuals. Influencing the government is something that you can do every night at home on your computer. It's something you can do in the streets when you come together with your friends and have a rally. Those are things that do work. We have proved that over and over again, that if you organize, if you stick together, you can make change. And that's why there's so many people here, I think, because they know you come together and you're stronger. I wanted to thank all of our panelists. They've been so great. and thank the Jacob Burns Center for hosting us. And again, to thank the folks, all of the folks from Jacob Burns and from all the other organizations who helped to put this together. And I hope to see you again very soon for another climate change movie.
Of no pipeline all along this valley dell. I watch out my car door window as our country goes to hell. Historic homesteads, family farms devoured before my eyes. Cattle, horses, pastures, trees displaced and pushed aside. All these sensors on my dashboard, they can't help me here, but one goes on inside of me and suddenly it's clear we're at a standstill, suspended in time, with time running out, nowhere to turn, can't lift my foot from the brake. Where are we going, for heaven's sake? I gaze at the haze around me, heartbroken through my tears. Another time bomb ticking, as they have for years. Fossil fuels erupting in black and blue.